I'm Jim Beekler. I'm a professor of physics, don't panic, at West Virginia University in Parkersburg, West Virginia, just a small school. I'm sort of, I think outside the box, so they won't let me in the big schools. This is about death, which is a funny thing. Someone about physics talking about death. Yes, my theoretical work, I'm continuing development on a theory that was originally done by Einstein in the 1930s. It's called a unified field theory. And you hear today about superstrings, you read about them in the paper and all these fantastic physical theories. I personally think they're a bunch of bunk. And when they talk about quantum loops and superstrings and all these, what they call TOEs, theory of everything, they're trying to explain everything in the universe with one theory. They always invoke Einstein's name, and they say, well, this is what Einstein was trying to do. I'm sorry, if his brain was still in his body and his body had been cremated, he'd be rolling in his grave, because this is not what Einstein was trying to do. They all invoke Einstein's name, but he wasn't trying to do that. In physics, there are two general approaches to explaining everything in the universe. In physics, what we do is we build hypotheses and theories to explain all the events and phenomena that happen around us. And in physics, we do that by reducing everything to its lowest common denominator, its smallest part. And what they decided, actually was decided by Aristotle almost 2,500 years ago, was that things could be explained just with two concepts, and that is matter, everything is made of matter, and everything moves. So basically, the whole thing in physics, we try to explain everything as matter in motion. We try to break down everything. In my class, I like to throw things. I'll pick something up and I'll throw it, and that's matter in motion, everything. Now, technically in physics, there's a separation between mind and matter. So physics normally doesn't deal with things like mind. Those are separated out of science, out of physical science by Descartes, even before Newton in the 1600s. But there's a movement in the past 20 years because of quantum theory to bring mind and consciousness back into physics. And it's actually starting to get popular. I go to scientific conferences and do presentations on the physics of consciousness. And it's rather strange because although a lot of scientists would never talk about parapsychology or the paranormal, you go to a consciousness conference and they will always have areas where people talk about parapsychology and paranormal because that's part of consciousness. That's all actually coming in science. It's getting more respect. And so there is a movement to try to explain things as matter and motion, but what I'm doing is not physics. What I'm doing is paraphysics. This is my website where I have a journal of paraphysics. I publish a journal of paraphysics. And that's going beyond normal physics. In my physics, I try and go beyond matter and motion. I actually look for the underlying reality that underlies matter and motion, and that is space and time. To me, what Einstein was trying to do was trying to explain the whole universe as space and time. The space itself is the underlying cause of matter. And that's what I'm trying to do. So Einstein went on and did his special theory of relativity in 1905, general theory of relativity to explain gravitation, which I'm sure no one here would understand, so don't worry about it. I'm just throwing out names. And basically our gravity is due to our position in space-time, what is called a four-dimensional space-time continuum. So there is no such thing as gravitational force, it's just our relative position to other material objects in the space-time continuum. Well, another scientist by the name of Kaluza in 1921 expanded from four-dimensional space-time to a five-dimensional space-time, and he's actually able to include electromagnetic forces with gravitational forces and explain the whole thing with one theory. Now that has gone on today, and that's what the superstring people use and the quantum loop people use, but they use a different approach than Einstein wanted. There are two basic approaches that go all the way back to the Greeks, and that is the underlying reality, whatever it is discrete. Everything is particles, discrete separate particles with nothing in between them, not even space and time between them. And superstring theory are trying to break down space itself into particles of space. Time is particles, according to them. Time is particles. We perceive a continuous time. We don't go like 1 minute, then we jump to the next minute, jump to the next. That's discrete time. That's what these people are trying to say in quantum physics, and the time is discrete. We go bump, 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 but we just perceive it as continuous. Einstein said, no, it's continuous. And so I'm taking the continuous approach to space and time that Einstein did. And developing his theories, I developed a theory of consciousness, and I can explain what happens to us when we die. And as a logical deduction from the physics of the space-time continuum. And I explain life, biology, and then I can explain that mind and consciousness survive as separate entities when the body dies. And that's what I'm going to try to explain to you here. It's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be talking in five-dimensional space-time. So I have to give you a little bit of idea. We cannot perceive, of course, five-dimensional space-time. Normally perceive five-dimensional space-time. We para-normally perceive five-dimensional space-time. And in that extra dimension, that extension of our normal material being here, there's no matter, because matter is in our four-dimensional space-time. So this is beyond matter in an extension. Matter can go into it, so we have no loss of words. We have no experience in a five-dimensional space-time. Our experiences are seeing the lights move and everything. Our everyday experiences in normal four-dimensional space-time. So we don't understand how we can perceive in a higher dimension. Things are really weird in a higher dimension. This is just straight geometry. They have geometries. In geometry, you can make as many dimensions as you want and look at the consequences. What we do is we make analogy of a two-dimensional space in three dimensions, and that's easy to explain. Then use that analogy to explain what happens in higher dimensions of space. So I'm going to try and make that analogy. We can take an ordinary two-dimensional. Everyone understands this as two-dimensional? There's one dimension, two dimensions. Okay. Imagine there's nothing on this yet. This is just clear plastic. So this is a sheet. But where does the sheet exist? The sheet is only two-dimensional, but it's in a three-dimensional space. It's just that this is not three-dimensional, is it? This is two-dimensional in geometry called plane. But I can imagine what it would be like to live in a two-dimensional world that is inside a three-dimensional world. In other words, this is actually described 150 or 130 years ago, and they talked about small creatures called filmites. And a filmite would be a small creature, and this two-dimensional world he actually lives inside the sheet of plastic, filmite. So what does he sense? Well, there's no such thing as a sphere or a solid object. A solid object with a spherite would just be a circle or a triangle or something written on the sheet. Does everybody understand that? Now, I'm a three-dimensional creature. Any creature who lives within this two-dimensional space would not even know I exist. If he knew I existed, what would he know? Well, if I touched the sheet, what would he see? Would he see me? What would he see? He'd just see the point. In other words, he'd see my finger as a circle. Now, it's really funny. How many of you are interested in UFOs or anything?
Yeah.
And if you go out hunting ghosts, you see globes in I've got pictures of globes in graveyards and places. Now, think of me as a three-dimensional creature, and I put my finger down here as a two-dimensional creature. All I see is a cross-section of my finger, a circle. What do you think a globe is in haunted? And some scientists actually say that's what UFOs are. They're higher dimensional creatures trying to come through our dimension, so they appear as globes and things. Do you see the analogy? Now, this sheet is perfectly flat. If I go and I put a curve in that sheet, the filmite living inside the sheet would never know it. See, I can twist this any way I want to, and it wouldn't make any difference to the filmite inside, because he's stuck inside, he'd never see that curve. So that curve is in a higher dimension. That curve is in the third dimension. The filmite can. Well, that's Einstein's explanation of gravity. They call it the general theory of relativity. The four-dimensional space with time as the fourth dimension is curved in a higher dimension, a fifth dimension. We cannot, just like the filmite, no matter how I curve this, the filmite can't understand that curve because the curve is into a higher dimensional space. Well, that's the same way general relativity works. Our four-dimensional space-time is curved in the fifth dimension. We cannot sense the fifth dimension. That's one interpretation of general relativity. And that's what Kaluza used to combine electromagnetics successfully with gravity. Now, he did it successfully. The theory's been ignored almost for 100 years, or 80 years now. But I and other people are trying to revive it because it worked. It's one of the rare instances when something works and science pays absolutely no attention to it for years at a time. Now, and just make the analogy, I have the two-dimensional filmite who can't sense things out in this higher dimension. By the same token, our material bodies, picture this two-dimensional surface as our four-dimensional space-time by analogy. And then the fifth dimension is out here. All of our matter is inside the sheet. And I even call it a sheet. Our four-dimensional space-time is a sheet. And we are extended point by point into the fifth dimension. But our material body is stuck inside the sheet. So all of our material world, if we feel gravity, if we try to push two magnets together and they repel because we've got North Pole to North Pole, that force is inside the sheet. All of our chemistry is inside the sheet. All of our normal science is inside the sheet. Everything we see and do is inside the sheet, so we never really perceive what's outside the sheet. But still, we are extended non-materially outside the sheet into this higher dimensional space. And that's where everything's happening. That's where all your paranormal events are. The sheet is space and time. You go outside the sheet, you don't experience time, because time is part of the sheet. So you go outside the sheet, there's no time. It's the simultaneous moment that all mystics talk about. Question?
The fifth dimension, then, is that electromagnetic field?
It deals with the electromagnetic. So in a sense, it's actually magnetic. The electric part would be inside the sheet. The magnetic part is outside the sheet. And I can show that with Einstein's theories. It's an extension of Einstein's theories. So basically, our memories, we are extended outside the sheet, even though our material body is stuck in the sheet. And our memories are actually magnetically imprinted all over in this fifth dimension, in our fifth dimensional extension. Now I'm going to try and draw a picture of it here. Does everybody, Maura, do you have a...
Yeah, I was wondering, just to make a connection here for myself. When you say our memories are in the fifth dimensional field that involves electromagnetic, in that space, does like force attract like force? In other words,
There is no force.
There's no force there at all.
There is no such thing as force. All the forces are inside the sheet because force is a material thing.
So electromagnetic is not a force.
I always have this problem when I explain this to people. In physics, we have definite definitions of things. When I'm speaking of force, there are only 5 kinds of forces in physics. Electromagnetic forces, static electricity, magnetics, gravity, and then the 2 nuclear forces inside the nucleus. Other than that, all forces are pulls and pushes.
Yes.
So one person was trying to ask, well, what about the force of thought? Thought doesn't have any force. It's not a force in physics. It has an influence. That's something totally different. So are you talking about physical forces that I'm talking about? Or are you talking about like I force somebody to do something by thinking?
I think I'm thinking more like paranormal experiences that happen all out in the fifth
Okay.
dimension. If
Okay,
I
there is no
put-
force. Force is a material
Okay.
thing in that sense, and it's inside.
So influence, push
The
and pull.
influences, right.
Does it matter what kind of experience, as in a scientific term, I experience paranormally? Is that influenced by what I'm putting out in the memory level to the fifth
Mhm.
dimension? I hope you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll try to. You can understand how this is hard to understand. I've been trying to do it for 30 years, and I still have trouble trying to think five-dimensionally. Yes?
This is the beginning of her question. She said, you said memory, our memory is in fifth dimension.
In our extension, our five-dimensional extension, it's not
Okay.
just anywhere, it's,
Well,
we're all extended in the fifth dimension as part of our five-dimensional
All
extension.
right, now, I'm wondering about conscious memory, unconscious. In other words, do we, you said we don't have, I'm trying to think now. Do we have an unconscious memory of what you're telling us about fifth dimension, even though in the third dimension we cannot perceive what
Yeah,
that's like?
I would say probably yes.
That maybe one reason we're drawn to this topic even
Mhm.
is that part of our unconscious memory does know these things.
Well, we're connected all the time. Everybody has ESP.
Yes.
We're connected all the time. See, again, this is a continuity. Every point in five dimensions is connected all the time with every other point in five dimensions. We are connected with the whole universe at the same time.
And all of history at the same time.
Okay.
All of history at the same time.
And
Now,
future.
see, this is where you get confusion in terminology. In the same time, but time is a four-dimensional concept. Out here, there is no time.
Right. It's
Once, if you can somehow get out here, you're actually alive before you're born, because there is no time up here. Because you're like up here looking down. This is all the four-dimensional universe down here in the sheet. And so you're up here, and you can perceive all of time below you, in a sense, all at the same time, because time is simultaneous. Doesn't have the same meaning out there. This is what they talk about. Well, it explains past life reviews and things and near-death experiences. It explains a lot. It's hard to conceptualize that.
So if we perceive the influence of the fifth dimension as like a pinpoint or a globe or something like that, do we have any influence? How
We
does our
have as much
energy
influence on it as it has on us.
and is perceived fully by the fifth dimension?
Well, I don't think we can perceive it fully. I think enlightenment, say Buddha or someone who goes through an enlightenment, what they're doing is they're opening their mind to our five senses are inside the sheet.
Mhm.
Our sixth sense is that part of us outside the sheet. So that's why sixth sense is paranormal. You're actually sensing. We do this all the time. We're in contact with the whole universe right now through this fifth dimension. There's no such thing as time there. So in a sense, we're connected across all of time. And it's just we don't perceive it because we grow up and learn to experience and perceive in our four-dimensional space-time. So it's like everything we're overwhelmed by all of our five senses, all the input, so we don't realize the output here. Now, if a person goes through enlightenment, they sit down, they basically go into sensory deprivation. Self-imposed, they cut down the sound, and you go into sensory deprivation, you close off all the input from our four-dimensional space-time and try and hear something out here, your sixth sense. And I think that's what enlightenment is. Someone who's finally come to realize, to experience their sensations out here, and that is an enlightened person, in the sense of a Buddha or someone like that.
What about the entities or the energies or whatever you want to call them that are in the fifth dimension? I'm assuming that's where you're going to talk about spirit and that where we go after death and stuff.
That's
Can they perceive
we're out here.
all of our
We're out here.
dimensions? And like, can we
Well,
perceive all
this-
sides of that paper? Can they see everything we do?
Our four-dimensional space-time is not separate from this. It is a continuous thing. So the fifth, our material world is like a little thin sheet like this that cuts through the fifth dimension. So it is also fifth dimensional. It's just that we don't sense that fifth dimensional thing because the sheet, our material world, is so small, smaller than a proton.
Do they
or anything.
perceive us in
Of course.
a way?
But
in the way we-
they perceive us, but not the way we perceive them. Because out here, remember, they're not experiencing time and everything the way we are. They're not experiencing anything the way we are. And Moody, in his first book on near-death experiences, he has a wonderful quote in there. Some of the things he says in that book have been found untrue. His model of the near-death experience is incomplete. Some of the things he says they've discovered since they're wrong. But he has one quote from a woman who's had a near-death experience, and she's come back, and she says, "I can't believe it. The geometry that they taught us in school is all wrong." Why? Because she had experienced a five-dimensional geometry. Now, some of the things that would happen are really weird. They mathematically explored these geometries over 100 years ago, and they're not used anymore. For example, if I could get out of this sheet and come back, say I can make a circuit through the fifth dimension and come back to this sheet, I would be mirror imaged. All my left and right would be mirror imaged. My heart would be on the wrong side. Everything changes for left and right, because as you go out here, you sort of like twist around and come back twisted, and everything's opposite.
Is this where the parallel universe theory is?
The parallel universe is a totally different thing. That's a quantum discrete type thing. But I would believe that our four-dimensional space-time with five-dimensional extension is part of an infinite dimensional universe. So there could be other four-dimensional space-times out there within those infinite dimensions, which would be a multi-universe. Go ahead, let me first.
Okay, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm curious here. Is this done in physics a lot? You've taken this plane and you said, okay, this is our world on this sheet, okay? And we all of a sudden, everybody takes that definition and that imagination. Does physics do that all the time? Say,
No.
okay, make this
No.
this.
Right.
That's it.
It's a hypothesis.
Can this be proven mathematically,
Yeah.
or
Well,
how do you back that up?
You don't want, first of all, in physics you prove nothing. In science you prove nothing. Nothing can be absolutely proven in science. We just verify theories. Because even our gravitational theory now, if we go to Mars, gravity may act different on Mars, and we'd have to modify the theory. Okay. Wait a minute. Now, so we don't prove, we verify. Mathematics, you can prove anything. Mathematics doesn't count. It will be verifiable by other things. There are other parts of my overall theory that will eventually be verified, say, if there is a fifth dimension. Right now it's just a theory, but we have to verify things. And superstring theory and supergravity theory assume 10 and 11 dimensions. I'm only going 5.
Right.
They've skipped past 5 and then 10 and 11 dimensions. Don't even think about it. You'll twist your brain into little knots.
This is a very simplistic question.
There is no such thing. Go
Well,
ahead.
it is for me. Going back to my basic math and whatever, it's been a very long time. When we're talking in 4 dimensions, are we talking about the actual, the length, by the
Yeah.
width, by the height, by the
Exactly.
depth, or, you know?
1 dimension,
Right.
height, 2 dimensions, width,
Right.
3 dimensions, depth,
Right.
those same dimensions. And then time is the 4th dimension.
Oh, time
Time is the 4th dimension. That's why it's no longer 3-dimensional space with time, it's a 4-dimensional space-time. Space and time affect each other, so it's a 4-dimensional space-time continuum.
Yes, and the 5th dimension is
Is
the globe
outside.
that's encircled, encapsulates
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah, in a sense, not encapsulate, it is the globe. All of this is the globe, so it's not encapsulation.
Okay.
All this is, okay, question Becky.
Yes. I saw this about a year and a half ago on CNN. And I asked several people, did you see this? And they said, no. I hadn't read it on the front page of anything, and I know I observed this. It was a scientist from NASA, and he got in front of the cameras and said that they had discovered what causes gravity by the new technology that they had, and they said that there is a sphere within the center of the Earth rotating in the opposite direction, and that is what causes gravity on the Earth.
No, I think you misunderstood.
No, I didn't misunderstand.
Are you sure you didn't say that's what causes the Earth's magnetic field? Because the inside, we have an iron core, a solid iron core, and that has a liquid iron, the outer
No, he
core
said
around
it was
that.
a sphere
And
that-
it would be spherical,
Uh-huh.
it's iron.
Yeah, and
And it's the rotation of that relative to the mantle and the crust of the Earth that causes our magnetic field, not the gravity field. That's magnetic field. That's why I say, are you sure you didn't say magnetic field?
no, he said that this is what caused gravity, and he said
No.
that the sphere was going in the opposite direction of the Earth. That's what he
No,
said.
that would be magnetic field. You saw that on CNN?
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't make any political comments about C.
And does it rotate opposite? Is that part of it?
I don't know if the core that causes our magnetic field rotates opposite.
Mhm.
I'm not a geophysicist. That's geophysics.
Mhm.
Yes.
When we go into meditation and we contact, say, I guess I'm asking, is the fifth dimension similar to the cosmic consciousness, what's referred to as
I think that's what
consciousness?
again, it's continuous, everything continuous. It's a field, what we call in physics a field. Like we have a gravitational field
Mhm.
and we have a magnetic field. A field is not material. It's associated with matter, but the field itself is not matter. So we have gravity, electric, and magnetic fields in our everyday size world. The other fields are only in the nucleus. So the field is physical, but it's not material. So it's not matter. The fifth dimension is a field. What we experience as matter here is just a very, very dense single field, what Einstein called a single field. And it's continuous. Since everything is continuous, you are the universe. You're continuous with the rest of the universe, so you're extended. Now, I can make a simple four-dimensional analysis of that in our normal world. My body's made of matter. Does everybody believe that? It's made of material matter. All matter emanates a gravitational field. The gravitational field from my body touches absolutely everything in the universe. That's a continuity. Only this is like a super system to that. You're actually part of the field up there. You're not a matter making a gravity field. The gravity fields that are emanating from the material in your body literally touch the whole universe. Every piece of, every particle in the universe they touch. Only out there, it's not matter and field. In the fifth dimension, it's pure field. So what you are is a pattern, a small density wave, like pattern in the fifth dimension. And in my theory, I can show from physics, from basic chemistry, that life itself, you know, that little extra something, is actually a wave pattern, like a wave pattern in five-dimensional space. Just a little density part. It's like, almost like a jellyfish in water, but the jellyfish is made out of water. It's part of the water, and that's the way it is. It's very easy to show chemically once you assume the reality of the fifth dimension. Then, as chemical reactions get more complicated, that pattern gets more complex. The life pattern gets more complex. Until, in our material world, we evolve a brain. Well, at the same time we evolve a brain, that pattern, that life pattern, density pattern in the five-dimensional space-time, in that field, actually reaches another level of complexity. And while we have the physical brain, mind evolves corresponding to the brain. So the extension of brain in the fifth dimension is mind. And so it's like a pattern on top of a pattern. And then finally, we learn, when you're a baby, they've studied a baby's knowledge, how a baby grows, and year 1, 2, 3, 4, various stages a baby reaches in consciousness. And baby at first thinks only the present space and the moment. After a while, the baby learns when mama goes outside the room, mama still exists in the other room. And eventually we learn, while we're here, there are still Australians down on the other side of the earth. In other words, you expand your concept of space. In physics, we say space is no longer local here. It's non-local. And then we do the same with time. It's no longer present moment. We realize there's a history. Things happened before, and things will happen in the future. So we evolve a consciousness of time. At that point, our mind, where memories are stored in our mind, we do this through our memories of past events, learn extended space and extended time. At that point, we get a new level pattern in this five-dimensional extension, and that pattern is consciousness. So consciousness actually evolves when we learn of space, non-local space, and non-local time. I'll give you another analogy in a minute.
Could you say that again? What?
Our consciousness actually evolves when we learn of non-local space and non-local time. That's physics terms. Non-local is a physics type term. Or,
When you say a pattern, is this an energy pattern?
no, it is a field density pattern.
Okay, can you?
There is no such thing as energy in the fifth dimension. Again, you're using four-dimensional space-time terms. It's just a pattern. That pattern can have influence, and that influence can create energy in the four-dimensional space-time.
Okay.
Yes.
So when the pattern
Yes,
is there, it's something that I can't conceive of, in four-dimensional thinking.
If you could conceive of absolutely every atom and every electron and every proton and neutron and every electromagnetic wave in your body all at the same time, if you could conceive that, you could see the pattern. Because that pattern is the extension of every molecule, every atom, every proton, neutron, electron, and every electromagnetic wave in your body. It's a pattern. It's a development of all those. It includes everything that you are.
So it's more than energy.
Yeah, you have to really, you have to know your real self to get it. It's, in other words, it's way too complicated for it. It's the mind, trying to perceive the mind. Yes.
So it's a field of consciousness.
In a sense, it's a field, yes.
Field of
Consciousness is a field
and
pattern.
they say that, scientists say that every cell, everything in our body has consciousness. That's how it relates to one another. And when people have transplants, like this one fellow, he received a kidney and he started creating bubble
Yeah, I know.
and different things like that, where you take on the consciousness through the cells of another being.
Since our consciousness is this wave density pattern, and it's not just every molecule. It's not how every molecule in our body is extended in the fifth dimension, because there's no time out there. It's for our whole existence. It's like a roadmap to everything we've ever done. And when people have near-death experiences, they grasp that, and that's your past life review. In a near-death experience, you're just starting to realize your five-dimensional extension, which is, throughout time, your whole history of everything you ever were.
How is there no energy? I don't understand why a field doesn't have energy, I guess. To me, I have a hard time.
No, energy is derived from a field. Energy is derived
So we
from a
have all
field.
these patterns of neutrons, electrons?
They're patterns, yeah. No, extensions into the fifth dimension. Again, protons and neutrons are in the sheet.
Right.
This is how they extend into the fifth dimension.
I guess I don't understand in my mind, but I'm trying.
That's okay, that's
The
okay.
extension.
Science has been trying to understand this
I'll think
since
on this, I'll think on it.
1854.
So the
We've been
field,
trying to get it.
the field causes an influence. And
Yes.
that's what we call energy.
And that influence shows up in our four-dimensional space-time, the material world, as an energy.
Like gravity is a field, but its
Yeah.
influence is the apple falling down.
Gravity is one way that this is a superfield. Gravity is one way the superfield acts in our space-time. Magnetism is another way this field acts in our space-time. Electricity is another way this field. Matter is another configuration of this field in our space-time. But it's all part of a single field, and we're part of that same, so we're actually sort of in a sense before gravity and magnetism. And so that can affect gravity and magnetism and things, but it's an influence, not a force, not an energy. It shows up as forces and energies in our four-dimensional space-time, but out there it's more of an influence.
Well, that's really exciting then, if we could cause influence on the fifth dimension.
Yeah.
In the fifth dimension that causes a force on the fourth dimension.
And since it's a continuity, each of our individual patterns is in a sense all the time connected to all of our other patterns, plus all the other material and all the other sentient beings in the universe.
And sentient is a key ingredient?
No, I said all matter and everything.
Okay, good.
Sentience is just, I believe consciousness is just realizing that. And I actually think we're evolving to a new higher level of consciousness, which would be something similar to a Buddhist enlightenment, when we will eventually all realize that, the fifth dimensional connection.
So if consciousness evolves with the awareness of non-local space and time, did consciousness pre-exist the fourth dimensional experience where we evolve into consciousness? And what I'm talking about is cosmologically consciousness created reality. So if
I'll try and address that, but you're getting into verbal tongue twisters, mind twisters, but I know what you're asking.
But so the fifth dimension exists with consciousness already in it because of the consciousness created reality, right? I mean, you said that there's no birth and death and time and so
I'll try to get into that. Let me say. Now, as I said, going back evolutionary-wise, this is also the only theory of physics I know that supports evolution 100%, because, you know, you start out with the chemical goo, the chemicals coming together by chance or whatever, the chemicals come together, and then they start interacting together to form a simple pattern. Then through action with their environment, the chemical ooze grows, and more complicated pattern in the five-dimensional extension. It's a chemistry thing. And then eventually it evolves organs when the living organism starts differentiating functionally for different organs in the body. It needs to develop another organ that will control all the body functions. That's the brain. And that's what mind comes as a secondary pattern. If you've ever heard of chaos theory, that chemistry is a chaotic system and that the life itself is a chaotic complexity. The second level of complexity would be mind. The third level would be consciousness through evolution. And then once just as consciousness evolved when we realized non-locality in space and time, when we realize non-locality in five-dimensional space, we will evolve super-consciousness, or we will evolve a higher level of consciousness. And I think that's what boost enlightenment is, and other forms of enlightenment. I think that's what people experience when they have near-death experience. Now, to answer your question, try to. At each stage, when life, mind, and consciousness evolve, they're not just there. They then become a controlling agent. Life evolves out of a chemical reaction, but then that life tailors the chemical reaction to continue the evolution. So at each stage, life controls the chemistry, then evolve mind. Mind controls life, which controls chemistry. Then you evolve consciousness. So consciousness controls mind, which controls life, which controls the chemistry in our four-dimensional space-time. So, in that sense, when it starts controlling, consciousness becomes part of our genetic code and is inherited by the next generation. In other words, the consciousness controls mind, controls life, and controls the genome, and more or less puts a pre-pattern for consciousness in the next generation. So once the human race has consciousness, you're not going to get a human who's born without consciousness. And then the baby is just filling out that pattern as it grows up and realizes its own non-locality in space and time. But that consciousness is out there. Now, the question of consciousness in the universe. Since I consider, as Einstein did, that the whole universe is just a single field and everything we experience are just different four-dimensional manifestations of that field, to have one consciousness within that field essentially means the whole field is consciousness. Since that field is outside space and time, that means all time is conscious also, since it's five-dimensional.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I can't get back here. Okay, now, since the field is continuous, one consciousness in the field would mean that the whole field is consciousness, which means the universe itself is consciousness. The universe itself is conscious at the moment that the first consciousness evolves, whenever that was. Now, that consciousness is in the fifth dimension, a very complex wave pattern, outside of our four-dimensional space-time. So, it's outside of time, since it's in the fifth dimension. So when the universe evolves its first consciousness, it more or less, all time is conscious. So I can't say if we created ourselves or not, because in the fifth dimension we're outside of time. I think we died before we're born. In this fifth dimension, it makes sense. But you have to think five-dimensionally, and it's very difficult, because our whole concept of time disappears. And that started in 1905 with Einstein's special relativity. I think you had a question here.
I just was going to ask you if your theory included a first cause, which I think we sort of touched on a little bit. It's like the chicken and the egg thing.
This is all logical. All I assume in my hypothesis is the real fifth dimension. And then I do logical deduction from that to come out with this whole thing. What you're talking about would be speculation, not logical deduction. I can speculate on things. As I speculate that ours is probably only a five-dimensional universe within an infinite number of dimensions, so therefore there may be other pockets, other universes to make a pluriverse. But that's speculation, that's not deduction. I want to So I speculate maybe there was, but I wouldn't want to think what it is. Did you have a question?
No, well, I was wondering about the void. The Judeo-Christian Bible talks about the void, and then light was brought into the void, but you would see that as a higher dimension, the fifth dimension actually.
I think there are higher dimensions. I think when we realize the fifth dimension, we will start learning of the sixth higher dimension and higher dimensions as we go, which could be the levels of enlightenment you go through, are actually physical dimensions. Not material dimensions, because we're beyond matter, but they might be other physical dimensions we become aware of. And we can't become aware of any higher dimensions till we experience the fifth dimension, which is a Buddhist type of enlightenment. You have a question?
I just wondered if that dimension was where all that consciousness goes, if that becomes the cosmic consciousness, and becomes the
And the
whole.
collective consciousness.
And it all goes together and becomes that
Yeah,
cosmic.
that would have levels, I think. There's a human consciousness,
Right.
because we're all physically the same, so we can like read each other through. But other sentient beings, other conscious beings in the universe,
Right.
we eventually join them. So there's like a human collective consciousness, which is part of a larger connected one. And I think some of the thing with the UFOs and everything is actually, we're being contacted through paranormal.
Mhm.
I think that's what it is. Not that they're actually coming here, although they can be.
Mhm.
There's nothing in physics that outlaws beings. There's nothing in physics that says we can't go out there. It's just, it costs trillions of dollars and a lot of engineering time, which we don't want to put into it.
Right.
So I think UFOs, a lot of UFO phenomena are actually paranormal contacts in this dimension, because they would be more enlightened than we are probably if they're older. Had a question in that?
Yes. You know, with evolution in itself, personally, I think it's ridiculous, but, and I don't mean because of a religious aspect.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're familiar with Whitley Strieber, Dreamland.
I know who he is. I haven't heard
Okay,
anything disclosed.
and he had a program, and I happened to call and get in. And when I told him what my belief was, that we were seeded on this planet from other universes, they kind of chuckled and they said, well, have you heard of Zecharia Sitchin? And I said, I've heard the name, and they told me to read this book. And when you read this, you'll come to understand so much as far as how we were here, how we were brought here, and that depending on where you're starting from, when you're talking about consciousness, it just makes such a difference as to how you look at things.
There's nothing in science, there's absolutely nothing in any science that says that we couldn't have been seeded. However, what limited evidence we have shows that we evolved. That first thing we can't get. There are problems with evolution, but overall it's a good theory, in my view. Whether something outside could have affected that or not, again, that's totally possible in science. In fact, one of the theories of how life evolved on this planet is that it was on an asteroid or a comet that hit the Earth. That's an accepted scientific theory. So life didn't evolve. Like, there are scientists who think it didn't evolve here, but it's not outside influence. It evolved in outer space or maybe someplace else. And when a comet had a small living organism on it that clobbered this, that could have been the start of Genesis here. You don't know. So, you know, the thing with science is if you basically you're stating a hypothesis, scientific hypothesis. Without a theory and some way to test it, like you were saying, it's just a hypothesis. And the evidence now is that life did evolve on this planet, although there are other hypotheses. Yes? Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It seems that when you're able to get outside of time, you know, and to me, or just hearing people's experiences, it's not, you know, some people can go through it with enlightenment, but those of us that are not, that's not our path, you know, it's like it just, every once in a while it'll happen, you know, where
Enlightenment can be spontaneous. There are,
you know, where there's just, you know,
spontaneous
you're traveling and you need to be someplace at a certain time, and within the time-space continuum, there's no way you can get there on time, but yet you can. Or, and it's like, you know, reading as a child The Wrinkle in Time, you know, Madeline L'Engle, it feels like that you know, at times like where it's like everything is happening at the same time. And once you break that shifting that belief of time, then it's kind of like you pop up into the fifth and come back down. You know, I don't know if that's what you're saying, but that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Can I explain? Can I get on with, are they pressing questions? Can I get on and try to explain what happens when we die, and then have more questions? Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Now, as I said, life, whether life was implanted here or whatever, at some point in the universe, life must have evolved. What do we consider life? And then if it's planted here, I don't know, maybe it did evolve someplace else. But I think it probably did evolve. Now, you figure we live in the sheet. The sheet has nothing on us. It's perfectly flat. Then there are small little bumps and curves in the sheet. And those little bumps and curves create a pattern. That chemical pattern becomes a complex pattern. So then life evolves. Then life would be actually little curves and bumps on the surface of the sheet. Then eventually mind evolves. Mind is a secondary pattern, like the black pattern on the sheet. So mind is this black pattern. Life is bumps in the sheet, a pattern of bumps in the sheet. Then mind is a pattern over top of those bumps in the sheet. Eventually you evolve consciousness. Well, if I look very closely at this overall pattern of mind is actually a bunch of little dots. And those little dots that make up the pattern of mind are consciousness. These are the three levels. Now when you die, what happens to all the little bumps in the sheet? Well, in chemistry here, yes, in the sheet. But in the sheet analogy, basically the sheet goes flat. Because all the lumps are gone, life is gone. But what still exists in the fifth dimension? The pattern, mind, and the little dots consciousness make up. In the same way, mind and consciousness survive death. Just as this pattern, that pattern is still there, whether I've got the curves and bumps of life, whether it goes flat, we die. The pattern, mind, and the little dots, black dots make up that pattern. Consciousness still exists. The thing is, they're no longer attached to the sheet. They can go right through the sheet, they can go out here, they can go anywhere we want to. In the same way, the pattern of mind and consciousness continue to exist after life ceases. But they become just patterns here. Now, during our whole life, we experience our material world through our five senses, right? We're literally, I feel, my fingers touch an impulse goes up here to my brain, then the brain makes memory, puts it in mind, in five-dimensional space-time. So our normal experience is through our senses. Although we are sensing at all times everything through the fifth dimension.
Can you tell me why you're using that sheet?
As an analogy. This two-dimensional sheet is an analogy to four-dimensional space-time.
Is that a standard way to
That is a standard because we cannot perceive of a four-dimensional space or five-dimensional space. So we do everything by analogy. That's exactly the way it's done. Can I finish with this?
I just want to ask you to clarify one term that you use. You say mind, but do you mean brain?
No, brain is a material thing. Mind is the five-dimensional extension of brain.
Okay.
I said that earlier.
Not consciousness.
Mind, no. Consciousness is a refinement of mind. It's a much finer, more complex refinement of mind. So I'm saying there are things that there might be animals and such that have mind, but don't yet have consciousness. They maybe have a partial consciousness. Maybe they have this non-locality space, but they don't understand history and non-locality of time yet. The time flows, past, present, future. That's what the consciousness comes to hold. Okay, now, the pattern exists after life, and it can go out here. Now, during our life, we take into our five senses. When this pattern separates from the body, when mind and consciousness survive death of the body, and they survive, mind still expects to get sensory input. That's what had happened in your whole life. Your mind is getting sensory input. It gets nothing. The brain is dead. The senses, the brain to mind, in fifth dimension, that's what the mind has perceived. Unless it's enlightened, that's what it's perceived. So your whole life. Mind, it does not get sensory input. So what happens? Well, if it doesn't realize, if you're not conscious of the fact you're dead, you just exist in a black void. Because the mind is expecting sensory input from four-dimensional space-time, and it's not getting any because the brain's no longer functioning. And it's decaying into dust. That's a black void. Or maybe the mind will start reliving its own past experiences, bad ones, hell. That's where people like Hitler go. They start experiencing all those emotions. There's reason to believe they start experiencing emotions they caused in other people while they're still alive. If you kill a lot of people like Hitler did, he will experience that when he dies. He's in hell, his own hell. In other words, you create your own hell.
How does this
Because during life, the most active, energetically active chemical reactions in your body create pattern. What are the most energetically active chemical reactions in your body? Emotions. So your emotions are a very heavy part of that pattern of mind and consciousness. Now when you die, if you're not getting sensory input, you don't realize you're stuck out there in the fifth dimension experiencing the whole universe. You start, the way of body, if you don't feed your body, it cannibalizes fat, right? If the mind is not getting sensory input from four-dimensional space-time or material world, it starts cannibalizing its mind. And it goes first to the most emotional things, because those are the strongest memories. If you have a lot of bad memories, a lot of bad things and connections with other people, you create your own hell, like Hitler or someone like that. Or you might do a past life review. That's the physics explanation of past life review. You're cannibalizing your own thoughts. If you have a realization that you're dead, a conscious realization of your existence in fifth-dimensional space-time, you open up the fifth dimension, and then all your input reverses, and it's not normal through your five senses, it becomes paranormal through the fifth dimension, because you're in contact with it. That's a paranormal thing. Now, before we have any other questions, if you open up, when you die, when you open up to the fifth dimension, what's the first thing you would experience? What fills every point of four-dimensional space-time and every point in five-dimensional? Light, exactly. You experience light, but you don't experience it the way we experience it here. You won't see individual colors. All the visible colors make up what? The rainbow. You put them all together? White light, yes. But when you die and experience light, you experience not all the visible, but X-rays and everything else. So how would you sense that? Probably as a brilliant white light. That's the white light. At the same time as and it would be globular because it would seem like equal distance all around you. So you'd be like inside the globe. You're inside the globe of white light in a sense. And if somehow from your past memories you experience motion and you take that globe and you have a sensation of motion, so if you have a globe traveling through like this, what is that? A light tunnel. It's all explained by physics. See how nicely my theory works? Yeah. And then you realize you are the light. The Buddhists tell you, when you die, if you see these things, realize they are yourself. You are the light, and then you become one with the fifth dimension.
What did you say the tunnel was?
It would be a globe of light, but you could still have a sensation of motion. So you take a normal globe and you move it, and it's a tunnel.
Sensation of motion gives you the
sensation of motion, right.
Right.
From past experiences, you're still sensing emotion. You know, you've got this, you're out of equilibrium, so you sense emotion. And with that white light, that would be the tunnel. Now, one more. One more thing. When you're out there, you're going to meet other people, right? Other people have died. How would you sense them? Which ones would come to you first? The ones that evoke the most emotional response, the most emotional memories, the strongest memories you have. Loved ones, Jesus, Buddha, God. Whatever that is, I don't even like using the term, but whatever it is. That's, in a sense, you'd more or less hit those patterns in your memory, and as you hit those patterns, they send light wave, not exactly, send a wave out through the fifth dimension that will attract those very beings. That's where they come to meet you. So like you ring a bell and it resonates with that sound and it comes. It works really well. Yes. Now your question. Sorry for delaying it. Yeah.
Okay. How do you explain that with children who have near-death experiences and come back and explain that they've seen light? They haven't evolved enough in their
But they're
mentality.
born
Once you take
with the
reincarnation-
pattern. They're born with the pattern. You're born with the pattern genetically. As I said, as you evolve mind and consciousness, that alters the chemical being. And so you've got a prerequisite, a predetermination, in a sense, a self-predetermination of consciousness built into you genetically. And so it's all there. We've all got it. In a sense, we are all enlightened beings. We just haven't realized it yet from our very birth. That's why children sense that. Because they have that as built into us genetically. After the first human gained consciousness, however it was, that becomes part of our genetic code.
So that the people who have done these terrible things have lost that.
They haven't lost it.
And that's why they don't see the light.
But they when they do their past life reviews, or they start cannibalizing their memories, when they have no more input, the biggest memories are going to be the emotional memories, not just theirs, but the emotions they evoked in other people, because emotions cause very strong patterns in the fifth dimension, so they're easily communicated through that single field. They will experience what they did to other people. Oh, hell. Yes, Cora?
So we have no five senses of perception on the fifth dimension. So when you say light, emotion, it's a connection to a memory of how you perceive. Okay.
Yeah. You move without moving, you experience time without time in a sense.
Okay.
And I'm speaking scientifically. People who talk just about, not about fifth dimension, but our normal space-time continuum and a timeline and everything, they say the same thing. In fact, in order to speak just about special relativity, it was developed in 1905 by Einstein, then by Minkowski in 1908. They talk about a space-time diagram, and you're not even supposed to use verbs of past and future, because in space-time diagram in science, past and future are all laid out on a piece of paper. So there is no past present, it's called a timeline. So that's already built into science. I'm just expanding on something that's already there. I have a question about this.
Well, when he's a near-death experience or enlightenment, they have what's known as a brain shift. And actually...
You get a gestalt switch, they call it.
What's that?
A gestalt switch.
Okay, that's another term for it. And there's actually changes in chemical makeup in the brain and the way that the thing acts and everything else. There's a shift in consciousness. How does the consciousness shift? Can you explain how that works?
The pattern that is your conscious, that third complexity pattern in the five-dimensional space-time, your extension, that is your consciousness, is getting input from the outside. But it is part of the five-dimensional space-time single field. So when it experiences that, the near-death experience, the light and everything, it becomes open to the extension of fifth dimension, so it's going to alter the pattern. So when you come back, your consciousness is altered, because the pattern is altered just through your realization of existence in that single field.
So your consciousness is expanded.
Yeah. And that's why when a lot of them coming back, they have more compassion, love, love for all beings, because you just realize you're part of all beings through your connection with the single field. I think it's very compassionate. And of course, the paranormal abilities are supposed to increase because they know that connection, so now they can utilize that connection, which that's where the paranormal is, the sixth sense, that's what it is.
What's the process of returning? Since it's all time simultaneous there, we're talking about consciousness. What is the influence that has a rebirth into the physical?
We're beyond science again. This is what I was saying. I can do things deductively, that's speculation. I can give a speculative answer.
Speculation.
That brings in the concept of purpose. I think purpose has nothing to do with religion. My sense of purpose is the universe is trying to realize itself through us. So in a sense, we're connected with the universe. We come to realization. Everything we realize, everything we experience, In a sense, the universe is also experiencing it. So the universe as a whole is the purpose of, is for the universe to realize itself, and it does that through us. That somehow, because of our connection with everything, our evolutionary path is enlightenment. And we can't have enlightenment until certain things occur in our life. Now we know that in the fifth dimension because we're outside. And so we realize, and the universe in a sense realizes, we have things we still have to learn to expand consciousness. Our overall purpose of the universe is it's realizing itself in a scientific, not a religious manner. But our individual purposes are to gain knowledge so we can continue our own individual evolution. So we come back because we